talking about kids thinking when they're reading, and what kinds of things are sort of invisible in your minds. You know, when you're reading and you're understanding something, you know, what's really happening in your minds while you're reading. And I've been a teacher for a long time, and I've been really interested in that question. And I've studied it, and I've talked to, you know, a whole bunch of kids in all 50 states. Isn't that cool? I think that's pretty cool that I got to go to all 50 states. That's my best thing. And I've gotten to talk to kids in all of these different states, and I've asked them a lot of times, what are you thinking while you're reading? And you know, it's interesting because even though kids are so different in this country, and even though, you know, they come from different places and they have different lives and different things that they love and different people that they love, they still say sort of some of the same things. Like one of the things that kids say to me when I'm talking to them about what they're thinking is that they're constantly trying to decide what's most important when they're reading. Like they're constantly thinking about, you know, is this idea important, or is this thing important, and does this really matter if I remember it? Once I was working with some kids in California. These were really cute kids. This one little girl's name, you guys are 5th grade, right? Mm-hmm. She was a 4th grader, so she was little, so you kind of write it off. But she was this kid named Lena. I said, you know, I was talking about deciding what's important when you read. Like you're going through and you're reading in a text and you're trying to decide what's the most important. And I was telling her what I thought was most important in things. And she said, she raised her hand and she said, I know how I like to do it. I said, Lena, how do you like to do it? And she said, I just decide what I want to remember for my whole long life. And I thought, you know, that's not a bad way to read. Like when you're reading, you're making decisions about things that you want to remember, maybe for your whole long life. I mean, there are books that I read in 5th grade. I remember one in particular called The Hobbit, which I loved very much. And the ideas from it, the images in my mind from it, do you know, I'm really old, but I can still see them. I mean, I can still remember the ideas from that book, and I was 10 when I read it. Like, I know, it's amazing, right, Jen? I mean, that's exactly what I was feeling, like, wow. And I think part of the reason, because I am ancient, I'm 52. I know. I know, it's staggering, isn't it? Believe me, I'm staggered by it, too. The reason I think I still remember that book and others and other ideas that I learned a long, long time ago is because, I know this is going to sound weird, it's because I decided to remember. I mean, I actually thought in my mind, I'm going to remember that. That's important enough to hold in my mind and my heart for, as Lena would say it, my whole long life. And I decided to remember certain things. And then when I got older and I got in college and whatever, I was studying the most amazing, fascinating things in the whole world, like how the brain works, stuff like that. When you get to college, you get to do that too. And there, I decided, and I would think, you know what? I'm going to remember this for my whole long life. I'm going to decide on purpose to remember. And I thought, when I started to be a teacher, I thought, wait a second, how come we don't tell kids that they get to decide? Like, we teach you things, but we don't always say this. Guess what? You get to decide what you think is important enough to remember for your whole long lives. You get to pick. Now, there are certain things that teachers really want you to know and ask you to remember, and that's one thing. But when you're reading a book, when you're learning about something that's fascinating to you, that you absolutely love learning about, you get to decide what you remember for your whole long life, just like Lena said. And I think, actually, I don't know you guys very well, but I think it's the coolest thing in the world to get to be the kind of thinker, like you are, who gets to decide what they remember for their whole long life. Like when you're, I don't know, 86, yeah? That there are things that you might even remember, I don't know, from today or from tomorrow at school. And that's not up to anybody else but you. It's really up to you. It's what you decide to remember. because your brain can remember stuff if you decide that you want it to, right? So we call that determining importance, or making decisions about what's important, making decisions about what matters, making decisions while you're reading, not after even, but right while you're reading. We call that determining importance. And so today, I thought what we would do, just because it's so much fun for me to get to work with kids. I taught 5th grade for a long time. Don't tell other kids, but 5th is by far the best. By far the best. I thought what we would do is sort of practice together, determining importance. Like, first I'll tell you what I want to remember, what I think is most important, that I really want to choose to remember from this little passage I'm going to read you. And then later, you can tell me what you think is important to remember, maybe for your whole long life, right? Does that seem like it might work? Mm-hmm. Okay. Teachers are just going to listen in, but every once in a while I'm going to stop and talk to the teachers, and now is one of those times. So colleagues, that's that kind of an introduction to determining importance, which I've just done in about 5 minutes, would really be spread out over several days. I don't want to be talking this fast. I have to be talking this fast. And I really want to talk, more about the books that I'm reading at home. I want to bring those in. I want to show them, I decided that this was important from this book, and here's how I decided. I want to talk a lot about what influences my decisions about what's important. And eventually, of course, I want to talk about the difference between author-based importance and reader-based importance. Because in some texts, think the ISAP or whatever you have, right? It's author-based importance, baby. That's what we've got to do. We are in there to figure out what the author thought was important. In most reading situations, it's reader-based importance, right? We really get to decide. Now, we've got to be able to support our decision. We've got to be able to say, and here's why. And here's what made me think that this is important. Here's the evidence. But the vast majority of your reading experiences, it's reader-based importance. So that's really where I'm going to start and really explore those kinds of ideas. So today, I'm just telescoping, what might be 2 or 3 days of instruction into that 5 minutes. So please understand that this would be, spread out in shorter lessons over a longer period of time. Okay, you guys, so I was telling you about determining importance, right? And then I was saying that we might practice it together, because what I'm interested in is hearing, of course, what you think. But it's not fair to ask you what you think before I share my thinking. We as teachers, we need to share our thinking to sort of show you not what's right, but how we think. And so I'm going to do that first. And then in a little while, you'll have a chance to share your thinking about what's important. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. How's your finger feeling, Jed? Okay, is it throbbing at all? No, good. When I did it, it throbbed. This book is an extraordinary book, one that I would love for you to have at home, like on your shelf in your room, so that it was so close to you that you could read it at any time. I mean, if I could pick books that you could have at home, this would be one of the ones I would pick, because it's that important of a book. It's called Hidden Witness, as you can tell. And it's a book about slavery in this country, but it's not like any other book I've ever read about slavery. Lots of times when we talk about the Civil War, I bet you talked about that this year. I'm guessing that you talked about the Civil War this year. And I'm guessing that you talked about slavery this year. That's kind of why I brought this book. Lots of times when we talk about slavery, we talk about slaves, like a whole group of people, which of course they were. But very rarely does an author write about individuals, a person who was held against their will, forced to work in deplorable conditions, and forced to stay that way for the whole of their lives. We usually talk about them in groups. In this book, we get to meet, in a way, individuals who were forced against their will to live in that way. And that's why I think this is an important book. There are some photographs. These are early photographs. If you've studied the Civil War, you know that it was, that the Civil War took place between 1861 and 1865. But I'm sure you talked about this as well, slavery existed long before the Civil War. and too long before the war. And these photographs were actually taken before the Civil War. This one was taken, you won't believe this, in 1850. That was 161 years ago. If you can imagine how long ago that was. I didn't even know before I had this book that they had any way to take pictures that long ago. Did you? And this is totally new to me. So I get this book, and I start reading these. It's photo essay, as you can see, because you can see that there's a photo on one side, but there's a short bit essay on the other side. So I started reading these photo essays. This one is called Portrait of a Nurse and a Young Child. And you can see in the photograph that the nurse is an African American, a woman held in slavery, and that the child she holds is white. And here's what the essay says. I'm going to stop as I go and tell you what I think is most important. We see here a young African American woman at an age when her own childbearing should be in full course. But instead, she is holding another woman's child. Her rounded cheeks and full face suggest girth, and she gives the impression of strong support to the householders, the owner's loved one. What a sadness of toil in her eyes. What a large hand with large fingers holding the child toward the world. Now, I've only gotten right to there. I've not read very much, but already as I've read that, I'm deciding that there are some things here that I want to hold in my mind and my heart, maybe for my whole long life. I don't know. But I'm going to decide to remember that there were women like this who, instead of getting to have their own families, instead of getting to spend time with their own children and holding their kids, and you know how people play with babies and make goofy noises and, you know, make faces and feed them and hold them and play with them, that instead of all of those things that should have been her life, she was raising somebody else's child. And when I think about, I'm a mom, and when I think about not getting to play and spend time with my baby, in just a little way, for just a little second, I can feel, what they say? The sadness of toil, hard work, in her eyes. None of us ever had to experience that who are alive today, at least not in this country. But I can feel in my own heart just a little bit of what she might feel, that heartbreak of not being able to spend time. She may have had a baby, we don't know, but she sure didn't get to spend time with him or her because she was raising, taking care of, playing with the owner's child. And I think it's important, out of all of those things, to remember just this one thing. How must that have felt to be that woman? How heartbreaking must that have been? Her splayed fingers lovingly cradle her charge. Her head covering was prescribed by law and entrenched as custom in parts of the South. Where was the real mother during this photography session? In those days, an important event in the child's life. There is a certain sadness in the eyes of this is what African American women were often called, mammy. There's a certain sadness in the eyes of the mammy, her fingers strong yet tender, are notable. Yet her face is asymmetrical, I mean sort of unbalanced. One side showing calm melancholy, and the other suggesting some distress. That's all there is in that essay. So when I get to the end of it, and I have to think to myself, Ellen, that's my first name. I told you it was Mrs. Keene, but it's really Ellen. I have to think to myself, Ellen, what do you want to remember? And I think what I want to remember from this photo essay isn't just how she must have felt to be torn away from her own children if she had them, but how, you know when it says it's asymmetrical, it means it's kind of unbalanced in her face, and you can kind of see what they mean. Like this side of her face is a bit bigger than the side closest to the baby. Can you see that? It's just, let me let you look at it close up, Jet, and the rest of you as well. Elijah, don't you see what I mean, honey? How that one side of her face is kind of, you know, it's larger, and it's asymmetrical. That means it's unbalanced in a way. Oh, do you want to pass it down to, is it How? I'm going to decide to remember just that word asymmetrical. It's not the same on one side as it is on the other. Because what I see when I look at that photograph is her mixed feelings. I bet she came to love this child, even though it's not her own. I bet she loved that baby. I mean, if you spend time with a baby, you pretty much fall in love. It's automatic. I bet she had mixed feelings. I bet part of her felt that she loved that baby, and the other part of her was heartbroken about not getting to spend time or even have children of her own. So I'm going to remember that word asymmetrical, unbalanced, mixed. One side's not the same as the other, because I think that's true in her face, but I also think that's true in her heart. So Jet, you have an idea about what you think is most important?
Well, I have a question.
Go ahead, sweetheart.
So this slave is taking care of her or his owner's baby.
What else do you want to ask, Jet?
I don't see how one side's stressed and one side's calm.
To me, it may not be that clear in the photograph, Jet. Part of what I'm thinking about when it says asymmetrical and is coming from the text, not just the photograph. I think what they're talking about is that the right side of her face, closest to the baby, is probably because of the photograph, the way it was developed, smaller. And it's just unbalanced. But what that really made me think about wasn't just the asymmetry in her face, the way her face is sort of smaller on one side and larger on the other, but in her heart. That's what it really made me think about. I know it doesn't say that in the words. I'm just deciding that for me, that's what's important to remember, is that she may have, I don't know, felt, there's a word called ambivalent. It means you sort of feel one way and you sort of feel the other at the same time. About that baby, loving the baby, but also heartbroken that she can't spend time with her own, or maybe even have her own. So I'm curious what you guys are thinking was important, maybe important enough to remember for your whole long lives, from this photograph and that essay. Jet, you've got the book. Why don't you start, honey? Why don't you tell us what you thought was important enough, maybe to remember for a long time?
I would remember that they call female slaves mammies.
That's the part you're going to remember?
Yeah.
So tell me more about that. Like, I'm just curious, honey, how did you decide that that was what you want to remember, that that's what's most important?
Because I've never heard of that word, and I would never think they would name a slave like that, a name like that.
So sometimes, Jed, let me see if I've got this right about you, and other readers too, I think. Sometimes when there's a new word and you learn it and you've never heard of it before, that's what kind of sticks in your mind as what's important, because it's new and now you know what it is and you didn't before. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
I wondered if kids, this is what I like about reading this kind of thing, because different kids have different ideas. So I'm wondering who else thought something different was important. Go ahead, sweetheart.
I think that I would remember that
Thanks, Jen.
the slave was torn away from her family, because that's something really important to me and for me to think about.
So you're saying that, that what you're going to remember about this is that she was torn away from her own family, at least part of the time, probably a long part of the time. And you decided to remember that. Tell me your name again.
Jayla.
Jayla, right. You decided to remember that, Jayla, because for you, your family is really important. And so you could almost feel the way that she would feel
Yes.
if she were torn away from her family.
Mhm.
Like, Jayla, in your own heart, do you actually, a little bit, can you imagine what that would be like to be that person?
Yes. It wouldn't be good for me because I really love my family, and even when my mom or my sister or my dad go away or out of town, it makes me sad, even though at this age I shouldn't be that sad about it.
But you can, I was. I remember when my mom and dad went out of town, I cried and cried. I went to the window in the house that looked the way that they flew away and cried out that window. I remember exactly how that feels. Jayla, you want to know what that's called, honey? This is really interesting. Well, when you're reading a book and you feel actually in your own heart, like you obviously do, a little bit of what the person in the text or the photograph is feeling, it's called empathy, honey. So,
Yeah, I know that.
do you know that word? Yeah, and do you feel that? Are you the kind of reader that feels empathy in your mind or your
Yes.
heart a lot when you read?
Yes.
Tell me more about what you know about empathy.
I know that it's when you feel sad about something, or you could feel guilty about something.
Or even happy, right? If you're reading about something really funny or hilarious or, or exciting, if you're reading about something exciting and your heart starts to beat faster, has that ever happened to you? Like you can feel it, yeah, that's a different kind of empathy too. In this case, it's despair. It's very, very sad. But it doesn't have to be all the time. Empathy can mean all kinds of different feelings, but it's when you feel in your own heart what the character or the photographed person feels in theirs. Congratulations, Jayla.
Thank you.
You felt empathy. You should tell other kids about empathy because they might not know. It'd be good to tell them. So we have two different decisions about what's important. I think it's really interesting that we have different decisions about what's important. Who had a different idea? Go ahead.
Slaves have to escape and find a plan to be free.
So,
So
go ahead, sweetheart.
because I gotta connect with her when she said that they had to separate families, they had to find ways out.
So you're thinking, like, as you look at this and at the woman pictured there with that baby, you're thinking this is somebody who might have been, we don't know because it doesn't say in the text, might have been right then when the photograph was taken trying to find a way out.
Yeah.
When you look at that picture and remember that text, you're going to remember, let me be sure that I have this right, sweetheart. You're going to remember that in her mind and heart, right then at that moment, she could have been thinking, am I ever going to get out? Do I have a plan to get out? She's thinking about life beyond that moment. Did I get that right?
Yep.
So I'm curious if there are other kids who think differently. Elijah, I can see the thought in your mind. Go ahead, sweetheart.
The thing I think is most important is how they have to take care of the owner's children, because I never thought that they would have to take care of other kids' children. I just thought that they have to work or work and things, not take care of kids.
So you have new background knowledge, you have new schema, because you were thinking, and that's one of the reasons I love this book, Elijah Wan, is because there are, wait, did I get it right? Did I say your name? Okay, because I thought when you smiled that I maybe said it wrong. I do that all the time. A lot of times when we read about slaves, we're reading about them working in the fields and working on plantations and harvesting crops. But the new bit of information for you, this is really interesting because Jet was saying the new bit of information for him was this idea of mammy. But the new bit of information for you is that African American women took care of the owners, I can hardly say that word, but the owners' children, and then that's new information. So in a way, you thought something different was important from Jet, but you decided that it was important in a similar way because it was new to you. Did I get that right? Honey, do you mind if I ask you just one more question? What else did you think was important in that piece?
Well,
Now take your time, Olajuwon, because I mean this to be hard. I want it to be hard. Now this is what I wish, excuse me for just a second while I talk to the other kids. This is what I wish all kids would do. Do you see the way he's taking his time to think of stuff? I wish all kids would do that because the best thinking takes the longest time. And sometimes kids think they have to answer fast. But really, the best thinking is what Olajuwon is doing right now.
I actually,
Wait just a second, Jet. I'll get to after Olajuwon shares his. Don't forget it, okay? This is what's so smart, just taking his time to think. I mean, he said one thing that he thinks is really important, but there's always more. And I'm just so curious to see what he's going to say next.
I'm kind of curious and I think is most important is how the owner doesn't really kind of not spend time with their own children instead of slave.
Honey, did you hear the teacher smile out loud just then? do you know why, honey? I just want to make sure that you know why they smiled out loud just then. It's because you said something that we hadn't even thought of in some cases. And it just reminds me, Olajuwon, it's worth the wait. You know how you took your time to think? It's so smart to do that, honey. Because look what you said. You said something that made a whole bunch of grown-ups, and the other kids, by the way, think of something that they may never have thought of before, which is like a gift you gave to us. It's better than a gift. It's like better than a birthday present, what you just gave to us. Do you see why it's important to take your time? It was so smart. Would you pass the book to Jet?
I was actually thinking of how they described how she was feeling and how, like, she said one side she felt depressed and the other side she felt calm.
Asymmetrical, yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
And I was thinking how the baby felt because it told us how she felt, but then it didn't tell us what the baby felt because maybe the baby felt scared because she doesn't know this person, or she could have felt like she doesn't even know her parents because she's never with them. Because when she's a baby, maybe she goes to bed early, and then she probably puts her to sleep, and the parents don't come back until like nighttime. And then after that, she probably works on the field or something.
Jet, I noticed something really interesting about you. Like a while ago, when you first shared, you were thinking that the mammy, that word, was important to you. And then the longer you thought, you added to your thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're thinking something, not necessarily different, but something additional to what you were thinking before. I really admire that you shared what you thought was important earlier, which was great, and that helped us. But then you went back and you added to it, which is the mark, Jet, of, and all of you are like this, I'm sure. It's the mark of a great thinker. Congratulations. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to just stop for a second, because I would like to continue. Oh, I know. Okay, all right, I can't stand it. Just time check, anybody? Have I missed my plane? I'm very, very close. Okay. Go ahead, sweetheart, and then sadly, we have to stop.
I'm concerned about the part when it said sadness flew in the eye. Sadness.
Say that again, Charlie.
I'm concerned about the part when it said sadness was in her eyes.
So, of all of the things that you could take away from this, one of the things that that you've decided is most important is that those little words, that the sadness of toil, I think it was how they said it, in her eyes. So you took that one little bit of text and you decided to remember that. Now see, that's so smart. Because, there are a lot of words, or a few words on that page. You could have decided that any one of them was important, but you kind of focused on a part. I'm wondering, sweetheart, how did you decide that phrase was so important? Like, what influenced your decision?
When the families were separated and that person, the slave had to take care of another person's baby.
Mm. And the sadness of toil in her eyes.
Yes.
Sometimes you read a sentence like that, the sadness of toil in her eyes, and as sad as it is, that the words sound almost beautiful to you. Was that true for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I led the witness on that. Did you catch me? I led the witness. I catch myself doing that all the time, right? I'm putting my ideas in his head. Sweetheart, I'm sorry. That was not. Sometimes teachers make big goofs, and that was one of them. Go ahead, sweetheart, and tell us what you think is most important.
I have a question.
Go ahead, honey.
Did they even care about what the slave felt?
What did she say?
Did they even care about what the slave felt? Sweetie, that's the kind of question that we call rhetorical. It means that we can't really answer it. We can guess at an answer. My guess is that no, they weren't thinking about that. That's my guess. But I think when you asked a question, do you know what you just did? In a way, you decided what was important. Because of all the things that they said on that page, the text and the pictures, what you decided was important was to consider the feelings of the person whose feelings weren't often considered. Did I get that right? Oh, Jayla, I wish I could hear it. This is breaking my heart. This is breaking my heart. All right, you guys, the sad thing is we have to stop. Don't you hate that? I just hate that. But I want, just for a second, for the teachers to be able to ask you a question today, any of you, about what the experience was like for you today, other than finding it so weird to sit in the table in the middle of a room with teachers. We know that was weird, but I want the teachers to be able to ask you questions about your experience today. So would you mind answering just a couple questions from them?
Yeah.
Great. That would be fine. Just, Sweetie, just say, would any of you have questions for us? Just ask them that.
Would any of you have questions for us?
Any one of you can answer. There's one behind you.
Hi, I'm from Evansville, Indiana. That's down by the Ohio River. I wanted to ask you, now that you've had this discussion and thought about the first essay, would you be interested in reading more of those essays in that book and learning more?
Yes.
Okay.
Interesting question. Yeah. One would hope, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Say it again. Say, would anyone else have a question for us?
Anyone else have a question?
And if you don't know their names, as we don't, just say yes, please.
Hi, you all did a great job, and I just had a question of how do you think that what you learned here today is going to change what you do in the future?
Gorgeous question. Gorgeous. Think about this one.
It's going to help us to take time to think about what we're reading and to be cheerful and think hard. And
Jayla, we're laughing out loud. We're smiling out loud, honey, because what you said was one of those things that other kids have said here today too that makes us really understand kids better, and we appreciate it. That's why. Let's say we'll have time for one more question. Jet, would you just say, would anyone have a question for us?
Would anyone have a question for us?
And then if you see somebody, just say yes, please.
Yes, please.
Elijah Wan, when Mrs. Keene asked you to keep going and she waited for a really long time for you to come up with another response, how did you not get nervous? How did you keep thinking and thinking and thinking and come up with something smart?
I kept looking. I was looking back in the text to
That's
like
important.
read and think about what it was saying. So after I read and thought for a moment, then it just popped into my mind. So I just told her what I was thinking.
It's time. I mean, I think the re-exposure is really important, but it's time. We don't give them time. This stuff is lurking. It's there for all kids. It's right there below the surface, right? The difference was time. And Elijah, we all think it was totally smart how you went about that, but we teachers sometimes forget to give you the time to do it, and we're sorry about that. Ladies and gentlemen of, is it Fox Hill School? Mm-hmm. Ladies and gentlemen of the 5th grade at Fox Hill School. That's how much they learned from you. Me too. Thank you very much.